What does photography mean to me? Well, personally, I have a great deal of admiration, respect for the continuity of the medium. When I enter my studio, I have a small frame print of the great photographer Paul Strand that was taken by a photographer named Morris Engel, who, as a young man starting out in New York, I became friends with Morris and he became a mentor to me. So for me, this continuity means a great deal. And I try to inspire to continue this, and this inspires me. My favorite subject to photograph is really documentary photography, or what we call today street photography. However, I don't like to restrict myself to any narrow view of this, and I also encompass portraits and details such as maybe close-up of hands or still life, or really anything that I'm attracted to. Who has influenced me the most, I think, is really classic documentary shooters of the 20th century, people like André Cortez and Brassai and Cartier-Bresson. I also like very much some of the surrealists like Man Ray and Dora Maar. And I was fortunate enough to have studied with a great documentary shooter when I was in New York as a young man, Lisette Model, and I really admire her work enormously. My personal photographic style, well, I look to photograph the things I'm interested in, whether it's a portrait or a street scene, in a more minimalistic way. I try to avoid clutter, especially in the background, and I'm interested very much in photographing people in urban settings, in what I like to call the urban landscape. And I'm also very interested in lighting and how that plays out in the scenes that I photograph, and I'm attracted to sometimes very strong contrast and interplay of light and shadow, especially when I'm photographing in black and white. What painters like to call chiaroscuro, which is just basically Italian for light and dark. And I'm attracted very much to all these elements. Well, for me, it was when I was a young man in London and bought my first Leica camera, used M4. I was doing photography before, but when I got the M4, I started to shoot a lot of black and white, and eventually I learned how to develop the film and print it. And I think that moment was when I was really in a darkroom for the first time and seeing an image appear in the developing tray, and it was just magical. And I realized that I wanted to make this my endeavor. Actually, I use both ways of shooting. Sometimes when I'm wandering around a place that I haven't been to before, a location or a city, everything falls together. You have a serendipity. The gods are with you, and there's an interesting background, and the light is right, and someone comes in the frame, and it just all works out. But I also keep a notebook of places that I've been to before, locations in certain cities, especially where I live and work and frequent a lot, like Paris, which has so many incredible backdrops and places to shoot. And I sometimes revisit these locations to try to get the initial shot, which might be lacking human element, and really make the shot more dynamic. A good example is the cover shot for my book, Passing Fancies. I passed these very decorative, beautiful street lamps in Paris many, many times, and I've often thought, I have to photograph that. And one day I did, but I said, but it's, missing something. So I went back and I photographed it when the light was just incredible, this beautiful backlight moment, and these two women appeared. I was actually waiting there and shooting many people passing by, and so this is really just a example of returning to a place and shooting in a more planned manner. Well, first of all, it has a more minimal appearance than most cameras, and it's more discreet. It's certainly quieter than most of the other cameras I've ever used, and I've been shooting with Leica M rangefinder cameras my entire career, and I use quite a lot zone focusing, which helps maximize the success rate when I'm out shooting. And to me, it's just amazing that this classic timeless design has gone into the digital age now with basically the same form factor as when I started with early M film cameras. I don't know if there's one thing, but for me, it was really about finding out who I was in this personal artistic journey. And I think this is something that each person has to discover on their own. And I would say to have patience and find out who you are and your true voice. Well, that's an interesting question, the title. I like the sound of it, and I think that broken into the component of the two words, passing and fancies, kind of encapsulates a lot of the photographs in the book. There's 64 black and white photographs, and I think it just captured the feel. Taken literally, in the singular sense, of course, passing fancy is something that could have a negative connotation, meaning something just of the moment, or even a cliche. And at one point I was a little bit worried about the title, and I did a small focus group among people who I respected, and at a certain point my graphic designer, Sally, said to me, the title's great and just stay with it, and she convinced me, and that's what it is.